Welcome everybody to today's webinar where we will be talking about how you can improve your building in actionable ways that drive down costs, and we'll also be talking about some of the challenges that facility managers face and how they might overcome those. My name is Uri Kogan and I lead product marketing here at R0. It's my great pleasure to be partnered on this webinar with Laurie Gilmer, the President and COO at FEA. Her primary areas of expertise include facility systems assessments, energy management, sustainability, and facility management organizational analyses. Notably, she's a published author and instructor and is the immediate past chair on the Global Board of Directors for IFMA. She's also on the National Visiting Committee of Building Efficiency for a Sustainable Tomorrow and represents IFMA in the Building Industry Decarbonization Collaborative. So she has an incredible amount of expertise to offer to us. Welcome, Laurie. It's so good to have you with us today. Just as by way of introducing R0 and IFMA, I'll give you a quick intro on us and then ask Laurie to share a little bit of her experience so that we have context. Then we will have a discussion and wrap up with questions from you, our audience. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about us. So R0 is the only comprehensive platform to help buildings optimize across occupancy, indoor air quality, health, and energy. And we do that by focusing on helping you sense key attributes of your building, everything from presence to counting occupants to air quality and environmental quality. And when you combine those things together, you're able to do some very interesting things. So the kinds of areas that we tend to work in and support from a value point of view are efficiency, health, and sustainability. So on the efficiency side, it's about helping you be more efficient with your people, helping you be more efficient with your spaces and with your energy use. On the health side, it's managing air quality. It is efficiency around clinical staff in hospital settings and disinfection. And then on the sustainability side, it's reducing emissions and chemical use, as well as helping you measure and verify what's happening in your building in support of initiatives like healthy building certification programs and ESG programs. So that's the scope of what we do. And we work with a lot of different organizations all across the economy and in different sectors, which are amazing partnerships for us. So with that, we will jump into the discussion portion of the agenda. And I will start, Laurie, by asking you if you can tell us a little bit about your work with IFMA and how you're working with facility managers who are worried first and foremost about operating costs. And in particular, what are the smartest actions that you're seeing them take to reduce energy and other costs in their buildings or campuses that we all know are in many cases under the design occupancy levels right now in the current hybrid kind of world that we live in?
Thank you very much, Uri. I'll start with just a little bit about what my focus areas are. So I work for FEA and I volunteer for IFMA. Those are two different hats that I tend to wear. FEA is a company that focuses on existing buildings and helping facility managers get the best performance out of their facilities. IFMA is focused on facility managers and advancing the FM profession. So between those two things, there's a lot of good experiences for this focus on how do we get the best performance out of our teams and out of our buildings. And you asked a really good question about what are we seeing out there, the smart things that people are doing. They come in a number of categories. One of the things that I see that some of the best FMs do is measure and benchmark their buildings. They measure energy performance. They might measure health and wellness has become a big thing, indoor environmental quality, indoor air quality. Since COVID, I think that has become much more of a focus for the interior environments in facilities, and facility managers are wanting to talk about what they're doing in their systems, and they're needing to also talk with building occupants who are very curious about the spaces they're occupying and very concerned about having a good quality environment to be in. So that measuring and benchmarking is really important. Energy performance continues to be a big deal. It's connected to decarbonization efforts primarily, and there's a huge focus for many organizations on that. So that's something that we're seeing. Lighting is continuing to get attention. It's maybe not as fancy as it used to be. It used to be all about converting to more efficient fluorescent lamps. And then it became all about LED and control. So there's still focused there. I think it's a little more on HVAC, but good FMs are watching those lighting levels, lighting technologies, et cetera. They're watching operating hours, especially in buildings that are lightly occupied, looking at how are the facility spaces used, who is in the facilities, where are they? Are there opportunities, if we have a lightly occupied building, are there opportunities to consolidate and have people in smaller footprint areas so that we can maybe operate the majority of the building or operate the portion of the building that's truly operational, operate that as appropriately? And then areas that aren't occupied, can we put them into a little bit more of a setback mode? That takes some configuring. Systems don't respond nearly as well as sometimes people want them to. So sometimes we're getting creative. And then indoor air quality, which I mentioned before, that the focus on things like what kind of filtration do we have? What sort of ventilation do we have? Are we employing other technologies like UV, et cetera, to help treat air and not just do things like clean coils and make our jobs easier on the maintenance side, but also what impact is that having on health? So then monitoring outcomes and looking at how to monitor outcomes. I think there's a lot of activity right now, a lot of thought being put onto how do we know that our buildings are healthy? I don't think we're quite there yet. The industry is discussing that quite a lot, but we do know that things like thermal comfort, visual comfort, having appropriate filtration, having a good PM program, those are the bedrock level of what a well-performing, what a smart FM is going to do in their facility.
That makes sense. Now, you mentioned, I want to dig in on the consolidation opportunities and setbacks in areas that you're moving away from. Can you tell me a little bit, or maybe give me an example of a situation where systems didn't respond the way folks expected and how folks managed through that?
Sure. One of the funny things that happens in facilities is people have their areas that they like to occupy. They have their sort of ownership areas. And so while a facility manager may want to consolidate to maybe one wing of a building or certain floors based on how HVAC systems are set up, et cetera, the occupants don't always want that. And so there can be pushback there. So sometimes we see that at odds with one another. We also see challenges with just the layout of systems and the ability to flex really with what the needs are. So those are a couple of things that are challenging. I think you had a little more in your question. Can you maybe supplement a little bit more of an ask in there if you could?
No, I think it's exactly what I was looking for, was a little bit more nuance there. So I think you answered it. Another thing I'm curious to see, are there certain actions that you're seeing that some facility managers are taking to try to address costs and address performance and IQ that in your mind don't make sense? Are there certain things that give you pause that you would like to remedy?
Yes. I think the one that bothers me the most are the quick sales pitches and fast promises for gadgety technology or complex technology. It felt like during COVID, we were seeing products popping out that were promising wonderful things, but if you really dug into the application, either the science wasn't there to back it up or the research wasn't there to back up the claim, but there was a promise. I had one facility manager actually tell me about a technology they were employing in their facility because they needed to show that they were doing something. And on the one hand, the engineer bit of me looked at that and thought, but it's not proven technology. Why would you put that in? But at the same time, it wasn't harming the system or the people, and that FM needed to demonstrate that they were doing something in their facility, and that was something that was visual. From a PR perspective, it was helpful. From a true effectiveness perspective, it was unknown. So that's one area where for me, I'm concerned about those quick solutions that don't have good backing. So that's something. Sometimes we get quick tech solutions or overly complicated tech solutions that I think facility managers, again, sometimes they want something. I've called it the Ronco solution, the solution that promises to do absolutely everything for you, and all you have to do is apply our technology, and your building will run itself. It will be more efficient and effective, and it's going to monitor everything. And what we found is there isn't really one solution that truly does everything. You have to have a trained staff who understands what's in their building. If you sensor up the building, that's great, but you need to understand how to interpret sensor data into what's happening in your facility. And then once you understand what's happening, what are you going to do about it? So you might see different temperatures, or you may see particle counts tick up, or what have you. You have to translate that into something meaningful and actionable. And so that's where that tech solution needs to meet people understanding, training, et cetera, to really make an effective outcome for the facility.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that data is only empowering if you know how to use it. Otherwise, it can have the opposite effect. So if you had a genie that could grant you 3 wishes to make buildings run more efficiently and lower costs without trading off occupant comfort, because like you talked about reducing the space that you're using, you talked about energy reduction, but you also talked about things like indoor air quality, which sometimes means for many people more fresh air, which means more heating or cooling than energy. So let's get a genie that can grant you 3 wishes that help you get to that efficiency and cost savings without the trade-off of occupant comfort, without the need for a multi-year retrofit of the building shell. What are the things that would be on your list?
Surprisingly, not a happy tech solution that's instantly going to solve everything. I think what I would love to see, and it's going to fit in with what I've already said, is number one, increase budgets for operations and maintenance programs. There's never enough. And I think probably almost every FM that might be tuning into this will probably be nodding their head vigorously that there's never enough money. There's never enough time, resources, et cetera, to do everything that we want to do. And the reason that I think that is so important, wish number one, is that a good operations and maintenance program is key to how the system performs. So to get to that good performance where people are comfortable taken care of, you have a healthy building, you need the financial support to really support the staff that's going to carry that out and the preventative maintenance activities that they need to conduct with all the other things they have going on. Number two, I would wish for more training for facility management staff as we think through new technologies that are coming on board and just some of the old basics as well, understanding system performance as related to outputs that you might see. How does that translate into an outcome that's going to be positive or negative for people in a facility? I would love to see more training for facility staff. And then the final thing I think I would wish for is, and this is where I'll hit on technology a little bit, is smarter, intuitive software for running the facility. So think like a building automation system, energy management system, CMMS, that is intuitive, little dashboardy, isn't so locked down and proprietary that you can't do anything with it, but that the facility manager can immediately get alerts and understand what's going on in their facility and what some of their key outcome metrics. I would love to tie key outcome metrics to something like that so we could then go in. It's never going to solve every issue that we bring up. Technology is really great at pointing out point problems. We have to put the data together to understand the story on what to walk down, what to fix, et cetera. So that final wish would be smart, intuitive technology that would
So
help.
I do want to dig in on a couple of those. So you talked about O&M first, budgets first. If you could increase O&M budgets by arbitrarily 20% for a given campus, let's say, or if you want, you can pick an example of somebody you've worked with, if it's better. Where would you actually invest that increase?
I probably wouldn't increase it by 20%. 20% is great, and the increase of any kind is going to be helpful. I would suggest we probably need to be thinking more on the order of double.
Okay.
Double our effort. I would put that into, I would definitely have a training program for staff. I would invest in having more staff to take care of the needs. And the way I would measure that is looking at something like your preventive maintenance completion rate. Are all of the things that are supposed to get done in a month, a quarter, a year, are they getting done? I would look at the facility condition index to see how well is my facility actually performing? Do we have a high backlog of maintenance, et cetera? And that will start informing you if we need more people, et cetera. It's usually the people time. And then there's the incidental stuff that you need to conduct PMs, et cetera. Those are probably the key big places that I would spend money. Capital improvement, that's outside the O&M budget. Money is needed there. For some facilities, there was one facility I remember, they had a cooling tower that was past its useful life. And they were literally holding it together with hanger wire and duct tape. It was money for things like that is also needed. But I think on a typical FM budget, it's really going to go more to the people conducting the activities, getting that staff trained up and operating well, and then seeing those performance indicators of complaints, completion rates, et cetera, seeing those improving. You've seen things like uptime as well. That's another one.
So that genie, unfortunately, has to have a meeting with the CFO to get this approved. What are the key CFO probably doesn't care one way or the other about preventative maintenance completion rate because he doesn't know how to tie that to the top or bottom line. How would you help him or her tie it to a financial?
That is such a great question, and something that we spend a lot of time in training programs talking about. It's that art of telling your story, we call it, how to speak the language of the CEO, because you're right, they absolutely don't care. Unless they've got an FM background, they usually don't care about your PM completion rates. Mm-hmm. They care about bigger things like, how much is this costing? We've put forth a concerted effort in the FM community to try to, rather than thinking of facilities as a cost center, flipping that narrative to an investment in organizational success, which means you have to start talking to the CEO or the CFO about what organizational success is. And so for any organization, they'll have a few things that they really care about. For some organizations, it's about uptime. It's about productivity, making sure that people can do their best job. And so you translate facilities activities into their impact on people productivity. There was one of my favorite stories on speaking the language was from an art gallery. I have a friend who's a facility manager in an art gallery and was having trouble getting financing, getting just basics taken care of. And so he started connecting the dots of impact on art and on the people experience to what was happening in facilities. And so they might see something like it's humid in the building, or it's a little bit warm and they're complaining about that, or they see a leak in the ceiling. And a leak in the ceiling or an old pipe or an old infrastructure isn't really that interesting. It can be very expensive. But if it occurs in the wrong place and it starts, let's say, dripping on the artwork, to make an extreme case out of it, suddenly we have a real problem that everybody can relate to. And so creating that narrative and putting it in the context of what the facility is about and what people care about at those upper organizational levels, figuring that out and then connecting the dots, that's the really important thing. So we spend a lot of time in FM circles helping people think through, what does your organization care about? And how do you align your needs on the facilities with the things people care about? Because again, they're not going to care about the PMs and whether they got done.
We've certainly noticed in our work that measuring things like CO2 levels, humidity, temperature, lighting, noise, all relate to people being effective. And to the extent that could, if you have a sensing program, then that can help you identify places where, whether it's because of the fundamentals of the building or the lack of maintenance, those parameters are not where you want them to be. And then that can help to bring data to support the storytelling that you just described of, hey, we need to invest more in doing the things to ensure that the conditions are where we want for the people or for the art or for whatever it is, that whatever assets you have in that space. So I wanted to also press on the third point about software. And you talked about something more dashboardy, more intuitive that relates to key outcome metrics. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of those key outcome metrics that in your genie wish you would get to see on a dashboard?
Some of the metrics we don't really have as an industry yet. Something like CO2 levels, I would wish for something a little bit bigger than that. Maybe it's tying CO2 levels and filtration to sick days. Could we do something like that? It's a long tail kind of metric with a long trend on it. It's not something you can instantly see. I think that's actually one of the challenges with indoor air quality and indoor environmental quality is they have less of an immediate impact as compared to something like temperature and relative humidity. But that outcome metric of if we could see productivity in some sort of real sense and or something related to health. And with health, the place my head immediately goes is sick time. If we could see something like that and relate that to the maintenance and what's getting done, I think that would be useful, but I think that needs a little bit of thinking and time. We have good metrics that we measure on the facility side. We have good financial metrics that we measure at upper levels, but getting to that outcome performance, I think that's really where the magic is. And I do think that more work needs to be done in that circle.
One small suggestion I would weave into that perhaps is, and curious if you have thoughts about it. You said earlier the consolidation opportunities and people maybe want to spend time in places that you didn't plan for them or want them to spend time in. With good occupancy data where people are spending time in the spaces they prefer and the space types that they prefer. So if you figure out, as is pretty common these days, that the phone booths where people can have private conversations are always occupied and the open areas are much less, then that's an interesting insight into what kind of spaces you should probably be investing in. And I think that could potentially relate back to metrics like indoor air quality or other metrics in terms of if you're seeing that an area with poor indoor air quality also is getting less occupancy, or conversely, that can be helpful in which spaces to double down on and which space to remediate or remove.
Sure.
But I take your point that some of those outcome metrics are longer in time. So the next question I want to ask you is, if you think about the best facility managers that you've worked with, that really you worked with them and you said this person really understands the nuances of being super effective in their role, what do you think that they were doing differently than the norm?
When I think about the ones that have been really effective, and very often it's effective in having a team that follows them and understands the mission and getting their financial needs met, the ones that are more successful, and they then tend to have as an outcome better run facilities. They're people who understand, they've made that connection with what the organization is about. Sometimes we say things like, whatever the organization is about, so must the facility management organization be about. And the really great FMs know that. They understand how to translate the activities of their team to what those in the upper level positions need to know about. They're good at speaking the language of the CFO, the COO, the CEO, and relating to that, letting them know what we're doing and how it's affecting them. And they're more successful in getting their budgets passed. They also tend to understand people a little bit better. They have a better understanding of their team and the value that team has, and they tend to invest in them. So things like training and what have you, that team feels like they're a team, like they're part of things. They're not marooned out doing a task, but they're part of that bigger picture. And not everybody on a facilities team is going to understand fully the bigger picture, but good organizations have a broad had the majority of their people understanding that bigger picture that they're part of, and that they play a part in that overall outcome. They care about their goal, their larger goals of performance, and they're dedicated to it. So when we think about like in the art gallery, what are they dedicated to? It might be providing a great experience for those who come to the museum to visit, that they have a great experience for them, and they're keeping the art safe for future visitors, or whatever that mission statement is. And then they translate that into, what does this mean for our FM program? And they dedicate to that mission. The facility managers that can understand big picture and then make that connection to the tiny details of the FM organization, they do really well. And again, it's that translating that message to their team.
So if I could make a humble summation of that, it's that being a facility manager, the name implies that you're managing a facility, but what you really need is to be a facilitation manager who can facilitate between the organization as a whole and its goals and its personalities and leaders and the work of managing the facility itself.
That's a good way to put it. You're the Babelfish translator between all these different groups, helping everybody see their best.
Yeah, that's I like that. Reminds me of a very funny book where that appeared. I don't know if that was the original in Hitchhiker's Guide.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, yeah.
Yes, I don't know if that was the origin story of the Babelfish, but it's a good book recommendation aside. That's great. You talked a little bit about the software piece already, but I want to return to it with another question really about the software systems and the building systems vendors more generally. What are some of the things that, if you could advise them, that you would ask them to do better to make products that are easier to adopt and also to some extent help to provide that bigger picture to operating FM? So you talked about the dashboarding aspect. You briefly mentioned, I think, not being proprietary. So maybe we can dig into that a bit more, or are there other things that you think are important?
Sure. So I think one of the challenges with software and systems and whatnot is we all want to protect our IP, and I get that. What we've seen over many years with particularly the building controls industry is a desire for, they sell the technology, they censor up the building and the systems, et cetera. And what they're really pushing for is the contract, the long-term contract. And it might be 3 years, 5 years, et cetera. And that's fine. What I would love to see from those contractors is a dedication to the facility managers and their teams and helping them get the best out of their facilities. It seems often what we see is a dedication toward getting the contract signed and not necessarily providing those great outcomes. And so I've had a number of instances where, one particular instance, there was a facility manager who didn't have a service contract with their controls contractor and was locked out from changing. They had no ability to change their sensor settings. So imagine that your building's running at 70 or 72. Someone says, I'm too hot, I'm too cold, whatever. And you can't change the temperature inside your own building because you lack a contract. And just to get the sensor set point changed, you have to make a call to your contractor. The tech has to come out, spend whatever time to change the sensors. To me, that seemed excessive. And I understand that the desire to have some control and to want these contracts. They're great when you can get them placed like that, but it seems to do a disservice to the facility management community, and they feel a little boxed in. They don't have many options. And so I think if we had better relationships between those entities and the companies that provide these services were a little more open with and a little more sharing with the facility management community, I think that would be a huge stride forward. Focus less on getting the term contract, focus more on providing great service. The contract will come, but you really need to focus on providing that great care and service and lead with that outcome of a good performing facility. You'll get the business. That one I would love to see. I think another thing is to be really careful about locking down operability features. Facility managers and their teams, sometimes they have people who are skilled in controls. They're really good about looking up information and working on connecting the dots with things that aren't going well, but only if they can get to that information and see how their systems are performing, et cetera, and calling the outsourced technician when you really need to. So just be really careful about locking down operability features that normal FM teams would want to have access to. So I think that's another place that I would say, let's just watch how locked down we get. We have good, smart people out there in a lot of corridors that if we're trying to get to good operations and good solutions, let's make sure people have the tools to really get there and not put a lot of roadblocks in the way.
I want to go back to another one of your wishes, which was more training and understanding. I'm curious what the best FMs are doing to find and train qualified staff.
Training is one of the toughest things that we see supported in any FM organization. It's often seen as something that's extra gratuitous. It's the first thing that usually gets cut when there's insufficient budget. The best FMs figure out yet how to still provide and how to articulate the value of training. Where we see them providing training, sometimes they'll go to third-party organizations like the IFMAs of the world, the APAs, ASHRAEs, et cetera, that have great training available. Sometimes they'll bring people in-house. Some organizations will develop their own training, where we're working with a large group across the nation where they're wanting to get everybody on the same page about operations and maintenance. And so they have a training program rolled out that they're taking throughout all of their various areas. And that's helping to get people on the same page. That I've seen as a really good practice. And they've seen that there is a benefit to providing that training. Now, they're going to look for an outcome. They're going to look for, the theory is, if you train people on something like better performance in operations and maintenance of buildings and systems, that as a result of that training, you should start to see things like costs come down, maintenance getting done, fewer complaints. There's a few things you can measure like that to see, are we really getting to where we want to be? You might even see retainage of staff improving as well. So those are the kinds of hallmarks that we also look for, that the best FMs, they put in place. Then they have to articulate that back up to the C-suite. So those who are in charge holding the purse strings, they've got to let them know what that good outcome looks like. Hey, we have more people and we're getting less complaints and fewer complaints. There's really good information on related to productivity in facilities and in the effect of a well-run facility program as compared to productivity in buildings. Productivity can massively increase with a well cared-for building, which sounds funny. And the trouble that we have in articulating that one is facility managers are typically over the operations and maintenance budget. They don't control the productivity of the people that are out in the floor space doing whatever it is that they're doing. And yet we have a story to tell where we can say, if you can spend X amount of dollars on training and a good O&M program, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the productivity. If we can increase productivity by X%, the salaries of the people in the building are massively outpacing what we spend on O&M. So if we can get better at telling that story, I think, and really great FMs do that, it's a little bit of a leap because we don't control that information and data, and it can be hard to get productivity data. But making that argument, that's another thing where I've seen some good success and a place where you can start to illustrate that link between a good program, training your staff, et cetera, to good outcomes for facilities.
So jumping off of that, can you give us a couple of stories of folks that you've worked with in commercial or educational campuses or what have you, where the ability to run a program with better storytelling, with maybe a greater O&M budget, with more open software tools. Can you give us a few examples of where you've seen that really deliver an outstanding outcome for those organizations?
Sure. I'll give you a couple. There's the museum that I let you know about. So the museum, when that facility manager started shifting how they told the story, and they had pictures to go with it as well. They did here's what you see when you make a complaint, et cetera. Here's what's really going on, and here's the potential risk. When he was able to illustrate that in language, and then also successfully using photos to illustrate what the potential or what the issue was. When he was able to do that, he was much more successful in getting his budgets passed and had an increase in funding. That was one. Another one I can think of is a facility manager who was chasing sustainability metrics, very concerned about sustainability, wanting to see things like energy use go down. And so they had worked really hard on improving energy performance in facilities and still wanting to make sure that systems were kept up and filters were changed, et cetera. So they did all of those things. But what really made the difference for that facility and that organization was the C-suite didn't really care that energy use went down. That was great, but that's just not very much in their interest. What really made the difference is when they started showing a graphic that showed the cost per square foot decreasing over time. And it was a long trend. And they basically said, here's when we started this program back in this one particular year. And over this amount of time, yes, our energy use has gone down, and that's great, but our costs have gone down as well. Here's how much we're saving through good care and the investment that we have with this team. And so that's being used to help articulate the value of the facilities team and their work. That actually played really well. And that it's a really basic graphic, but they use that regularly to help report.
So if you use a TCO type argument, and yes, you're investing more in O&M, but it's X amount per square foot relative to the savings that it's generating per square foot. Kind of
exactly.
That makes sense.
And they like to see that efficiency. They like to see that, yeah, our facilities team actually is saving us money. And then you can talk about here's where the money needs to go, or it's money that can be spent on other important things.
Makes sense. So I want to turn it to questions from the audience. There have been a lot of really great comments. So thank you, everybody who's left a comment. There's really one of them that I think is something that is maybe a question, or a question lurking inside a comment, which is a challenge of controlling indoor air quality if there's no policy around perfumes, colognes, and other wearable scents, and cleaning agents. Any thoughts on how to be effective in controlling indoor air quality when that's the case, which is
when there's no policy? So there's a few things there's things you can do by policy and practice.
Yeah.
You can set a policy that says this is a scent-free environment, therefore, and here's what we're going to do. But those of you in the building, well, here's where we need your help. It doesn't always make a difference without some sort of tether of concern. Like I was teaching a class not too long ago where there was a person who was dramatically affected by scents. I didn't know it until they started having, to me, it sounded like a little bit of a breathing issue. And it turns out there was a person in the classroom. I could not smell the odor of their perfume or cologne, but it was sufficiently strong that this person was having an attack. Those are the kinds of things, if you can tie a real person to their sensitivity to an outcome in a policy, then it becomes less esoteric. Now we're trying to help keep people safe. And this person has an asthma attack when we have really strong perfumes. And so out of care and concern for our fellow man here, we're going to ask that you please dial that back and help this person stay healthy. That can be also a really useful tool. When you have a real live example in front of you, we're much more caring when we have a real person in front of us. And then it doesn't feel like just we're setting this policy to set this policy. That's also a really useful tool that you can use. You can also employ localized filtration to help increase effective air changes. So putting in-room HEPAs, that kind of thing, that can help. The scent issue can be a challenging one to deal with. And so policy is good. A relatable story, a real person is really helpful.
I will just add to that, because the person who brought it up mentioned cleaning agents, that if you can supplement cleaning with UV, in-room UV, that can also remediate some of the need for irritating chemicals.
Absolutely. That's a great point.
So that's something that is, as long as, of course, you're guiding your janitorial staff accordingly, that can be a benefit, as well as saving some funds on that side. So let me just quickly check if there have been any other questions. Okay, yes, there is one more. Let's look at reduced utility costs resulting from more regular replacement of air filters. Is there any kind of metric or standard for improving airflow versus energy savings, or is it based on the type of system in use?
So can you read that question one more time?
Yes. So essentially the question is around whether there's a metric or standard for improving airflow versus energy savings. And I guess it's tied to whether you're replacing your air filters more often.
There are some good studies related to health and airflow. There was one I was just reading. It was a school study, and they were talking about, I want to say it was related to sick days versus the state of the filters. And the classrooms that had notably dirtier filters tended to have kids that were absent a little more frequently versus those that were changed a little more often. There's some different studies out there that we've seen. In that particular one, that was a school study, but we can see no question that, and when we talk about increased airflow, I'm thinking they might be saying increased ventilation versus filtration. And there's debate about what exactly we need to be doing. And it tends to be a bit of both. We need to have, filtration has a certain role in helping to clean up air. We have other strategies like UVGI that also help clean up the air. The increase in ventilation, bringing in more outside air, that also helps just dilute the air that we have in our facilities. So we're pulling constituents out of the air as it rolls through the HVAC system, but then we're also helping to just turn over that air a little bit more frequently. So I think both of those strategies are good to look at. In terms of understanding what the right way to go is, the industry's got a pretty wide range of what people think is acceptable, depending on if you consult Well or LEAD or different states and different bodies of research. There's a good, better, best debate going on with ventilation. ASHRAE has the research on kind of what the low bar is for minimum required ventilation. Code will adopt and back up what the state will say is required for ventilation. Those are minimums. And what we're seeing in research is that increased ventilation tends to be correlated with positive impacts on people, better health outcomes. The increase tends to be much more. So if you have something like 17% outside air as a normal baseline for an office, going up to 20%, 30%, 30% really is a big leap, but that's being embraced by some in the industry as being really the best practice. But again, we've got a lot of research that has us in a band of somewhere between minimum levels and 30%. Those tend to be the end points, the bookends, what is reasonable.
And obviously that varies by the kind of space that you're operating and the risk of that space. What's that?
And also what is in the space, the activities going on in the
Yes.
space, the equipment, et cetera.
Yes. Is there a particular robust, sustainable O&M manual that's up to date that you recommend?
A sustainable O&M manual. There's great resources out there for creating good operations and maintenance manuals. There are good standards that provide a platform for building an O&M program. So ASHRAE Standard 180, that's going to focus on HVAC systems. That's a good one. Usually what we say for any facility management team is standards like ASHRAE are really great places to start. And then you build from there and adjust your O&M manual to what is particularly needed for your systems, your equipment. The manufacturers have, especially on the large equipment like chillers and boilers and those sorts of things, they have particular requirements that you would want to fold into your O&M program. So there isn't one answer for everybody. There's a good baseline to start with, and then you need to make it really work for the facility that you operate, the organization that you serve.
There was one more question about, is there a way to actually measure indoor air quality from Charles? And there are indoor air quality monitors. We in fact offer those. Charles, we're happy to follow up with you on that. I want to wrap up by thanking you, Laurie. It's been a great pleasure and honor to have you with us, providing all of this insight. Have a great day, everybody.